We now know that the former High Court judge, Baroness Butler-Sloss, will lead the independent inquiry into child sex abuse. But it's still far from clear what, if indeed anything, was known at Westminster about those abuse allegations. Last night, footage from a 1995 BBC documentary suggested that whips, those who manage party business in Parliament, may have known some of Westminster's darkest secrets.
Oh, I'm just the chief whip, Mattie. My personal feelings are neither here nor there. I look after morale and discipline amongst the backbenchers, keep them up to the mark, listen to their problems, help them out when I can, administer some sharp kicks up the backside when that seems indicated.
Just like a prefect, head of house sort of thing. I'm sorry, that sounds very cheeky.
Not at all. That's exactly what it's like.
Anyone with any sense who was in trouble would come to the whips and tell them the truth. They'd say, no, I'm in a jam. Can you help? It might be debt, scandal involving small boys, or any kind of scandal which a member seemed likely to be mixed up in. They'd come and ask if we could help. And if we could, we did. And we would do everything we can, because we would store up brownie points. That sounds a pretty nasty reason, but it's one of the reasons. Is if we can get a chap out of trouble, then he'll do as we ask forevermore.
Now then, Mr. Stoute, you seem to have got yourself into a bit of a mess, and you haven't done a lot for the image of the party either, have you?
No. No, Chief Whip. I'd like to say how terribly sorry I am.
You should have thought of that before. Can we do anything for him, Stamper?
Not easy, Chief Whip. I've talked to the sergeant, and he's understandably reluctant to believe our friend here stopped his car to ask the way to his own bloody constituency.
Dear God.
I'm really
Do
awfully...
shut up, Stoute.
Sorry?
However, I did eventually persuade him to stretch a point. He won't be proceeding.
Really? Oh, my God. I can't begin to tell you how grateful
All right, Stoute, you've been lucky. Heard something else funny about you the other day. Heard you were thinking of abstaining on the second reading of the Environment Bill.
What?
Don't.
No. No, of course not.
All right, Stoute, take yourself off and try not to be such a damn fool. And if you must use whores, for God's sake, go to a decent knocking shop where they understand the meaning of discretion. Stamper will give you a list if you don't know any yourself.
Yes, right. Thank you very much. I'm so very... if ever there's anything at all, I can...
Yes, off you go now.
Goodbye. And, well, thanks again.
What a frightful little man. Where do they find them these days?
God knows. If I had a dog like that, I'd shoot it.
Well, yes, quite. Right, next.
Harold Earl.
You got anything on him?
There was a whiff of scandal about 10 years ago.
Rent boy, in a train. To Red Hill, yes. Wanted to sell his story, but we bought it and hushed him up. Bit dreadfully ungentlemanly to bring that up again. And a man's private life should be a man's private life, surely.
On the other hand, getting sucked off for sixpence in a second-class compartment is hardly prime ministerial behaviour.
Well, yes, you have a point there.
Think we still have something in the file. Let's have a look.
Well, today Newsnight contacted 45 former MPs who served in the Whip's office during that time. Most did not want to go on the record about their time in the job, and no one acknowledged having heard anything similar to the allegations made in that documentary. A former Whip from the 1990s told us he'd have gone straight to the authorities if he'd been made aware of any criminal allegations.
If you were one of my charges and you came to me and said to me, last night I was arrested for child abuse, I can assure you of this, I would have gone straight to my superior within the Whip's office, reported what you've told it to me, and the matter would have been taken well away from me.
But the question of what the Whips knew was also raised when the Home Office's most senior civil servant, Mark Sedwill, was examined by MPs on how his department lost files containing allegations of child abuse.
Earlier you exhorted other public bodies to search and share relevant documents. Would you include in that the Government Whip's office?
I would extend this to all bodies.
Well, I'm joined now by Neil Hamilton, who's now a member of UKIP, of course, but in the 1990s was a Conservative whip. Thank you for coming in. When you were a whip, what was the atmosphere like? Were the whips really all-powerful?
Well, Michael Dobbs, of course, has written very successful books and a TV series alleging that we were masters of the dark arts. And to an extent, I suppose we were. Maybe there was no real-life Francis Urquhart. But I think if you go back to the 60s and 70s, maybe even to the early 80s, there was a culture where the establishment were to be defended, protected, and secrecy was more the order of the day than it is now.
So what kind of secrets did the whips keep?
Oh, well, we had what was called a dirt book.
And not even a little black book, a dirt
A dirt book, yes. And the whips would write in it what they heard and saw in the course of their day, about their colleagues and what was said, the way they behaved. For example, if there were somebody in the bars who was behaving inappropriately, that would be noted, and it wouldn't just be ignored. Of course, you'd have a word with whoever might be responsible for embarrassing behaviour, which could embarrass not only himself but also the government or the party to which he belonged. I do agree with Michael Brown that if we had become aware of any serious criminal conduct, then you would have had to report that to the appropriate authorities. But I think, you know, there was, going back 30 or 40 years, much greater tolerance of what we'd now regard as highly inappropriate behaviour. Look at the Savile case or the Cyril Smith case, how the police, the establishment, politicians covered up what we now regard as much more than just disgraceful conduct, but actually a very predatory and criminal conduct.
Our political editor Gary Gibbon is in Westminster now. What's the atmosphere there?
There is widespread fear about what follows. The MPs are, some of them baffled, certainly horrified about the talk about conspiracy, the dark crimes that are alleged by past occupants of this building, but a fear that the public mood, just with the allegations, without things having been properly justified in public, the mood around allegations will swirl, will magnify, and there will be, as there was over expenses, but multiplied many times, a wave of disenchantment with politicians, the establishment political parties, and they'll feel that impact very strongly is what they feel.
There's been a flurry of talk of these books of dirt the party whips are supposed to keep on MPs. I mean, is that real? I mean, do they really do that?
It was a real phenomenon. I talked to a few ex-whips today about it. The books are about this size, bought in bulk from stationers, and the whips would write into them whether an MP looked like he might rebel, whether an MP was having a problem with their marriage, problem with their finances, that sort of thing. I'm told they never actually wrote in these books dark criminal secrets, and anything like that would be passed on in person, verbally to a whip. So these books have long since disappeared. They would have been destroyed after a parliament. Labour didn't carry on the tradition under Tony Blair. It's a habit that's died, but it is part of Westminster's past and part of this swirl of allegations.
Gary Gibbon in Westminster.